Kidnapper tried to take this bear's cub. What this human baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. The early morning mist clung to the tall pines surrounding the Marshall family cabin. Sunlight struggled to pierce through the dense fog that wrapped around the rustic wooden structure nestled at the edge of Oakwood Forest. Inside the warm cabin, 9-month-old Emma Marshall cooed softly in her playpen near the large bay window that overlooked the expansive backyard leading to the wilderness. Her mother, Savannah Marshall, hummed quietly as she prepared breakfast in the kitchen, occasionally glancing at her daughter, who was fascinated by the colorful mobile spinning above her. Just beyond the wooden fence that marked the property line, a small brown bear cub wandered curiously through the underbrush. His chocolate-colored fur was still damp from the morning dew, and his innocent eyes darted around, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. He had strayed too far from his mother while chasing a butterfly, his playful nature getting the better of him. The cub's small paws left tiny imprints in the soft earth as he sniffed at strange new scents that led him closer to the human dwelling. Savannah's phone rang abruptly, breaking the peaceful morning atmosphere. Her sister needed urgent help with a flat tire just 2 miles down the road. "It'll only take 15 minutes, Savannah thought, glancing at Emma, who was contentedly playing with her stuffed animals. After checking that the baby gate was secure and Emma had everything she needed, Savannah quickly grabbed her keys. "I'll be right back, sweetie," she promised, kissing her daughter's forehead before rushing out the door, leaving it slightly ajar to catch the morning breeze. What Savannah couldn't possibly know was that someone had been watching the cabin for days. A man, dressed in dark clothing, emerged from behind a cluster of trees, his eyes cold and calculating. Jacob Reeves had come to this remote area for one purpose: to capture rare wildlife for illegal exotic pet traders. A bear cub would fetch thousands on the black market, and this one had wandered right into his path, separated from its protective mother. Emma continued playing, unaware of the drama unfolding just yards away from her home. She pushed herself up on chubby legs, wobbling as she gripped the edge of her playpen, her curious eyes drawn to movement outside the window. The bear cub had ventured closer to the cabin, pawing at a patch of wild berries growing along the fence line. Jacob moved silently, years of illegal poaching having taught him how to approach wild animals without startling them. His weathered hands clutched a large canvas bag and a tranquilizer gun. The morning silence was punctuated only by distant birdsong and the occasional rustle of leaves as creatures stirred in the forest. The bear cub remained oblivious to the approaching danger, innocently exploring this new environment, while his mother searched frantically for him deeper in the woods. Through the window, Emma watched with wide-eyed fascination as the small bear playfully batted at a butterfly. Something in her developing mind recognized another young creature, not so different from herself. She giggled, pressing her tiny hands against the glass, longing to join this potential playmate in the yard. The cub looked up at the sound, curious about this strange noise coming from the human structure. Their eyes met across the distance, a human child and a bear cub, both innocent, both vulnerable in a world filled with dangers they couldn't yet comprehend. Neither could possibly understand how their paths were about to intersect in a way that would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. Jacob Reeves crept closer, the tranquilizer gun raised and ready. The cub was perfectly positioned, distracted by something at the cabin window. His finger tensed on the trigger, a cruel smile forming on his weathered face. Just a few more seconds, and the valuable prize would be his. Little did he know that what was about to transpire would shake him to his very core and change the course of multiple lives forever. A twig snapped under Jacob's boot. The bear cub's head whipped around, dark eyes locking onto the human predator. For a heartbeat, time seemed suspended as fear dawned in the cub's innocent gaze. Then instinct took over, and the small creature let out a distressed whimper, attempting to scramble away. Jacob cursed under his breath and lunged forward, abandoning stealth for speed. He dropped the tranquilizer gun, too risky now with the animal in motion, and grabbed for the cub with gloved hands. "Come here, you little gold mine," he growled, fingers closing around the scruff of the cub's neck. The terrified animal squealed, a high-pitched cry that pierced the morning stillness. Jacob quickly shoved the struggling cub into the canvas bag, cinching it tight while leaving just enough room for air. The bag writhed and bulged as its captive fought desperately for freedom. Inside the cabin, Emma's demeanor changed instantly at the sound of the cub's distress. Her smile vanished, replaced by a trembling lower lip. Something in that cry resonated with her on a primal level, the universal sound of fear and pain that transcends species. She pulled herself up against the edge of the playpen, straining to see what was happening to her newfound friend. The baby gate that separated Emma's playpen from the rest of the living room had not been properly latched in Savannah's haste. As Emma pushed against it, testing its strength with increasing determination, the gate wobbled and then swung open. Freedom beckoned, and Emma did what any curious, concerned 9-month-old would do. She began to crawl toward the sound of distress, toward the partially open front door. Jacob slung the bag over his shoulder, wincing as the cub continued to struggle. He needed to get away quickly. Bear cubs never wandered far from their mothers, and a full-grown female black bear was not something he wanted to encounter. He started to edge back toward the tree line, already calculating how much this young specimen would bring from his overseas contacts. A sharp crack echoed through the forest, the sound of underbrush being trampled by something large. Jacob froze, his blood turning to ice as he spotted movement deeper in the woods. The mother bear had picked up her cub's scent trail and was now charging through the forest, her powerful body moving with surprising speed for such a large animal. Her eyes, usually gentle despite her fearsome appearance, now burned with maternal fury. "Damn it!" Jacob hissed, abandoning caution for speed. He sprinted toward his hidden truck parked a quarter-mile away, the canvas bag bouncing against his back as the cub continued to cry out for its mother. The sound would only draw the enraged bear faster, but he couldn't risk stopping to silence the animal. Back at the cabin, Emma had managed to crawl her way across the living room floor, navigating around furniture with surprising determination for one so young. She reached the front door, which swung wider with the gentle morning breeze. The wooden porch stretched before her, and beyond that, the yard where she had last seen the fascinating, furry creature. A strange man was running away with something squirming in a bag. Emma didn't understand what was happening, but she recognized the cries coming from the bag as belonging to the friend she had made through the window. Driven by innocent concern, she crawled onto the porch, her small hands and knees moving across rough wooden planks. Jacob had made it halfway to his truck when he heard an unexpected sound behind him. Not the crash of an approaching bear, but something softer, more human. A baby's cry. He glanced over his shoulder and nearly tripped in shock. A small child, barely old enough to crawl, had somehow gotten outside and was on the porch of the cabin, wailing with surprising volume. The poacher hesitated, his pace faltering. He wasn't a complete monster. He trafficked animals, not humans, and the sight of an unattended infant triggered alarm bells. Where were the parents? How had a baby gotten outside alone? His momentary pause gave Emma time to crawl to the edge of the porch, her cries growing louder as she reached out toward the bag containing the frightened cub. Just then, multiple events collided in a perfect storm of chaos. The mother bear burst from the tree line, her massive form charging across the yard with terrifying speed. A car engine roared in the distance, Savannah returning earlier than expected. And from deep within Jacob's canvas bag came not just squeals but a strange, almost human-like sobbing that seemed to harmonize with Emma's own cries. What happened next would later be described by Savannah Marshall as the moment time stood still. As Jacob stood frozen between the approaching bear and the vulnerable child, an unforeseen connection was forming, one that would forever alter the lives of everyone present. The mother bear slowed her charge as she approached the edge of the yard, her powerful muscles tensing as she assessed the situation with an intelligence that belied her wild nature. Her nostrils flared, taking in the mingled scents of her cub, the human kidnapper, and something else, the sweet milk smell of a human infant. Her massive head swung between Jacob and Emma, torn between rescuing her cub and avoiding the unpredictable humans. Jacob Reeves had faced dangerous wildlife before, but never while caught between a mother bear and a human child. His heart hammered against his ribs as sweat beaded on his forehead. The canvas bag continued to writhe against his back, the cub's cries growing weaker from exhaustion. In that moment of paralyzing indecision, Jacob made a critical error. He looked directly into the mother bear's eyes. Wildlife experts warn never to make eye contact with bears. It's perceived as a challenge, a threat. The female bear interpreted Jacob's stare exactly that way and let out a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very air. She rose onto her hind legs, towering at nearly 6 feet tall, her front paws displaying claws designed to tear through flesh and bone. Emma, startled by the bear's roar, stopped crying momentarily. Her wide blue eyes took in the massive creature standing just yards away. Rather than showing fear, however, the baby's face registered something closer to wonder. She rocked forward on her hands and knees, gurgling softly. Savannah's car skidded into the driveway, gravel spraying as she slammed on the brakes. Through the windshield, she witnessed a scene from her worst nightmares. Her baby on the porch, a man holding what appeared to be a squirming sack, and a full-grown black bear reared up in attack position. Her scream caught in her throat as she fumbled with her seatbelt, desperate to reach her child. "Emma!" Her voice finally broke free as she tumbled from the car, but she froze after taking just 3 steps. The bear had dropped back to all fours and was now moving, not toward Jacob or Emma, but in a wide circle, trying to position herself between her cub and the humans. Jacob's survival instincts finally kicked in. With the mother bear temporarily focused on circling, he saw his chance to escape. He could drop the cub and run. The mother would likely prioritize reuniting with her offspring over pursuing him. But the bag represented thousands of dollars, months of planning. Greed warred with self-preservation in his mind. What happened next would later be reported in local newspapers as miraculous and inexplicable. Emma, with the fearlessness of a child too young to understand danger, suddenly produced a sound that was neither cry nor laugh, but something in between, a trilling coo that somehow cut through the tension like a knife through butter. The mother bear paused mid-step, her head tilting as if listening. Emma repeated the sound, rocking her small body in rhythm with her vocalizations. The bear sniffed the air again, taking a hesitant step closer to the porch. "Emma, don't move, baby," Savannah whispered, her body rigid with terror, as she calculated whether she could reach her daughter before the bear. But something told her to wait, to watch what was unfolding before her eyes. The canvas bag in Jacob's hands gave a particularly violent jerk, and in his state of shock, his grip loosened. The top of the bag opened just enough for a small furry head to emerge. The cub, gasping for fresh air, its frightened eyes darting around until they locked onto its mother. The cub let out a pitiful whimper that seemed to echo Emma's earlier cries. Something shifted in the atmosphere, a strange parallel becoming apparent to everyone present. Two mothers, two babies, separated by species but united by the most primal bond in nature. Emma continued her unusual cooing, reaching out toward the trapped cub with chubby fingers. The sound seemed to resonate with both bears in a way no one could have predicted. The mother bear's aggressive stance softened almost imperceptibly, confusion replacing rage in her dark eyes. A new sound pierced the strange tableau. Sirens in the distance. Savannah had activated the emergency alert on her phone when she first saw the scene. Help was coming. But would it arrive in time? And would the presence of more humans escalate the already volatile situation? Jacob Reeves stood frozen, the bag half open in his hands, caught in a moment of reckoning. The mother bear took another step forward, her gaze now fixed on the canvas bag containing her cub. She was close enough that Jacob could smell her wild scent, could see the individual hairs of her dense fur moving in the breeze. "Drop the bag and back away slowly," came a new voice, firm, authoritative. At the edge of the property stood Park Ranger Michael Hayes, his rifle trained not on the bear but on Jacob. "Now, Reeves, I know what you're doing, and it ends today." The poacher's face drained of color at being recognized. His reputation had preceded him to these woods. With exquisite slowness, he lowered the bag to the ground, his movements careful to avoid startling the bear. As soon as the bag touched earth, something extraordinary happened. Emma, who had been watching with intense focus, suddenly clapped her hands together and let out a delighted shriek, as if applauding a performance. The sound startled everyone, except, surprisingly, the mother bear. The massive animal's attention shifted from Jacob to Emma, her head cocking to one side as if trying to understand this strange, fearless creature. There was recognition in that gaze, not of a human child specifically, but of innocence, of the universal nature of young life requiring protection. With remarkable gentleness for such a powerful predator, the mother bear approached the bag, using her snout to nudge it fully open. The cub tumbled out, momentarily stunned before recognizing its mother. With a joyful whimper, it scrambled to press against her protective bulk. Savannah seized this moment of distraction to dash forward, scooping Emma into her arms and retreating to the relative safety of the porch. Ranger Hayes kept his rifle trained on Jacob, who raised his hands in surrender, all fight gone from his posture. What none of them expected was Emma's reaction to being removed from the scene. She began to cry in earnest, reaching back toward the bears with such determination that Savannah struggled to hold her. The baby's distress seemed to communicate across species barriers. The mother bear paused in reuniting with her cub, her massive head turning toward the sound. For one breathtaking moment, mother bear and human mother locked eyes across the yard, a silent understanding passing between them. Both had nearly lost their young today. Both would do anything to protect them. The bear huffed softly, almost like a sigh, before gently nudging her cub toward the forest. But the cub resisted, taking a few hesitant steps not toward the forest, but toward the porch where Emma continued to reach out with tiny, grasping hands. The mother bear made a sound low in her throat, not threatening, but cautionary, yet did not stop her offspring's curious approach. "This is impossible," Ranger Hayes muttered, his rifle lowered but ready. "I've never seen anything like this." The bear cub paused at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at Emma with bright, intelligent eyes. Emma's cries subsided to hiccuping breaths as she leaned forward in her mother's arms, one small hand extended downward. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into infinity, Human child and bear cub regarded each other with a curiosity untainted by fear or prejudice. Then, in a gesture that would later bring tears to the eyes of everyone who heard the story, the bear cub rose on its hind legs, balancing precariously as it stretched upward. Its small paw extended upward just as Emma's hand reached down, not quite touching, but bridging a gap between worlds that had seemed unbridgeable moments before. A flash caught the moment. Ranger Hayes, overcome by the unprecedented scene, had pulled out his phone to document what he knew no one would believe without evidence. The photograph would later go viral, becoming a symbol of innocence transcending boundaries, of connection deeper than language or species. The mother bear huffed again, this time more insistently. The cub dropped back to all fours, giving one last look at Emma before trotting back to its mother's side. With dignified slowness, the bear turned and led her cub toward the forest, pausing only once at the tree line to look back at the humans gathered on and around the porch. As they disappeared into the shadows of the forest, Jacob Reeves was being handcuffed by Ranger Hayes. The poacher's face held an expression no one had seen there before. Not just defeat, but something closer to shame. He had witnessed something that challenged everything he believed about the divide between humans and animals, about what constituted connection and understanding. "He's been trafficking endangered species for years," Hayes explained to Savannah as backup arrived to take Jacob away. "We've been tracking him for months, but he's always been one step ahead, until today." "It was Emma," Savannah whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's head. Somehow, she knew exactly what to do. Emma had settled in her mother's arms. Her earlier distress melted away into drowsy contentment. But her gaze remained fixed on the spot where the bears had vanished, as if some part of her understood the significance of what had transpired. News of the incident spread quickly through the small community, then beyond, as Ranger Hayes' photograph made its way onto social media and eventually national news outlets. Experts debated the meaning of the bear's behavior, offering explanations ranging from scientific theories about mammalian recognition patterns to more poetic interpretations about the universal language of innocence. For the Marshall family, however, the meaning was simpler and more profound. In the days that followed, Savannah would often find Emma at the window, gazing out toward the forest with an expression too knowing for her young face. And sometimes, in the distant underbrush, she would glimpse movement. A mother bear, teaching her cub to forage, keeping just close enough to the edge of the property to be seen, but never approaching. A boundary had been crossed that day, a connection formed that defied explanation. Emma would grow up with no conscious memory of the event, but something about her would always draw animals near, always enable an understanding that went beyond words. And deep in the forest, a bear cub would grow with the imprint of human kindness, passing on a wariness tempered by curiosity rather than fear. Jacob Reeves, serving his sentence in the state penitentiary, requested and received a copy of the famous photograph. Guards would report seeing him study it for hours, tears occasionally tracking down his weathered face. Upon his release years later, he would become an unlikely advocate for wildlife protection, telling his story to anyone who would listen. The day a baby's innocence and a mother's love taught him the true meaning of humanity. The forest at the edge of the Marshall property would become a sanctuary, protected by new conservation laws sparked by public interest in the story. And every year, on the anniversary of that extraordinary day, Savannah would take Emma to the porch at dawn, where they would sit in peaceful silence as the sun rose over the trees. Sometimes, if they were very quiet and very patient, they would see them, a shadow moving among shadows, a mother and her growing cub, living wild and free as nature intended. And Emma would smile, a knowing look beyond her years passing across her face, as if recognizing old friends from a shared adventure too profound for words. 5 years passed since that fateful morning. Emma Marshall had grown from a crawling infant into a spirited kindergartner with curious blue eyes and an uncanny affinity for animals. The story of her extraordinary encounter with the bears had faded from national headlines, but remained a cherished legend in the small mountain community of Pine Ridge. Savannah had transformed their cabin into a more permanent home, reinforcing the safety measures while maintaining the property's natural harmony with the surrounding wilderness. She had also established a small wildlife education center in town, using her family's experience to advocate for responsible coexistence with the forest's inhabitants. Emma had grown up listening to the story of her bears, as she called them, though Savannah sometimes wondered how much her daughter actually remembered from that day. On a crisp autumn morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table, her small fingers carefully coloring a picture of a bear family. The resemblance to their forest neighbors was striking. The mother bear's distinctive white chest patch, the cub's slightly lighter-colored ears. Details a child shouldn't know without having seen them up close, repeatedly. "Mommy," Emma said without looking up from her drawing, "Brownie is sad today." Savannah paused while pouring her coffee. "Brownie? Your teddy bear?" It was a reasonable assumption. Emma had dozens of stuffed bears, gifts from well-meaning friends and strangers who had heard their story. Emma shook her head, her pigtails swinging. "No, Mommy, real Brownie, in the forest." She tapped her crayon against the drawing of the younger bear. "He's looking for his friend but can't find her." A chill ran down Savannah's spine. Emma had never named the actual bears, at least not in Savannah's hearing. And the way she spoke, with such certainty, such specific detail, stirred something deeper than maternal concern. "Honey, how do you know that?" Savannah kept her voice gentle, free from the anxiety building in her chest. Emma looked up, her expression so matter-of-fact it was almost unsettling. "I just know. Like how you know when I'm sad, even when I don't say it." She returned to her coloring. "Can we go check on him after breakfast?" Before Savannah could formulate a response, a sharp knock at the door interrupted the moment. Through the window, she could see Michael Hayes's Forest Service truck in the driveway. The ranger had become a friend over the years, checking in regularly and helping to document the local wildlife's movements. "Morning, Savannah." Michael greeted her with his usual easy smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Got a minute to talk? Preferably." He glanced meaningfully toward Emma. "Emma, sweetie, can you finish your drawing in your room? I need to talk to Ranger Mike." The little girl gathered her crayons with unexpected solemnity. As she passed Michael, she paused. "You're worried about Brownie, too," she stated. Not a question, but a confident assertion. The ranger's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but Emma continued toward her room without waiting for a response. Once Emma was out of earshot, Michael's expression turned serious. "We've got a situation. The female bear, the one from that day, she's been spotted alone repeatedly over the past week." "What about the cub?" "I mean, he wouldn't be a cub anymore, but that's just it. The younger bear hasn't been seen. It's unusual behavior. They should have separated naturally by now, him being old enough to establish his own territory, but they've remained unusually bonded. Rangers have never seen them apart in 5 years until this week." Michael hesitated. "There's more. We found evidence of illegal activity in the southeastern section of the preserve. Snare traps recently set." Savannah's hand flew to her mouth. "Poachers? Again? After everything that happened?" "Jacob Reeves is still in prison," Michael assured her. "But his operation wasn't just him. We've suspected for years he had partners." He lowered his voice. "The timing is concerning. The younger bear disappears, and suddenly there's poaching activity? It feels connected. What about tracking the bear? Doesn't he have a tag or something?" Michael shook his head. "We never tranquilized or tagged them. After what happened, it seemed, I don't know, disrespectful somehow. They've been monitored from a distance only." A small voice came from the hallway. "I can find Brownie." Both adults turned to see Emma standing in the doorway, her drawing clutched in her hand. "Emma, I asked you to stay in your room," Savannah began. "But I can help," the child insisted, her eyes wide with determination. "I know where to look." Michael knelt to Emma's level. "Emma, these are wild animals. It's dangerous to—" "He's in the cave by the waterfall," Emma interrupted. "The bad men put him in a cage, but he's still there. He's waiting." Her lower lip trembled. "He's scared, Ranger Mike. Really scared." The adults exchanged alarmed glances. The waterfall cave was nearly 3 miles into the dense forest, a location Emma had never visited, at least not with Savannah's knowledge. How could she possibly know about it? "Sweetie, how do you know about the waterfall cave?" Savannah asked carefully. Emma's expression turned frustrated, the way children look when adults fail to understand something obvious. "I told you. Brownie showed me." She tapped her forehead. "In here, like he always does." The implication hung in the air, too fantastic to acknowledge yet too specific to dismiss. Michael cleared his throat. "There is a series of caves near Blackwater Falls. It's remote, difficult to access. Perfect spot for illegal operations. You can't seriously be considering—" "I'm not saying I believe in whatever this is," Michael said quietly. "But we've been searching for days with no leads. What harm could it do to check?" He looked at Emma thoughtfully. "Besides, there's the photo." The photo he referred to was the one he'd taken 5 years ago. The impossible moment when human child and bear cub had reached for each other, nearly touching across the boundary of their worlds. It had been analyzed by wildlife experts around the world, many of whom had commented on the extraordinary cognitive connection it seemed to capture. A few fringe researchers had even suggested a form of interspecies empathic bonding, though such theories were generally dismissed by the scientific community. "I'll assemble a small search team," Michael decided. "Discreet, just a couple of rangers I trust. We'll check the caves." "I'm coming too," Savannah said firmly. "Absolutely not. If there are poachers, Emma stays with me, and I stay with her. That's non-negotiable. You know she'll try to follow if I leave her behind." It wasn't just maternal protectiveness that drove Savannah's insistence. Something deeper called her to witness whatever might unfold. 3 hours later, a small group made their way through the dense forest. Michael led, followed by another ranger named Thomas. Savannah kept a tight grip on Emma's hand, while a wildlife veterinarian named Dr. Lena Chen brought up the rear, carrying medical supplies in case they found an injured animal. Emma seemed to grow more alert with each step deeper into the woods, her small head turning at sounds the adults couldn't hear, her eyes scanning the underbrush with unnerving focus. Once, she stopped abruptly, placing her hand on a tree trunk where, upon closer inspection, Michael identified bare claw marks. "He comes this way a lot," Emma announced. "Following the sweet berries." Dr. Chen raised her eyebrows at Savannah, who could only offer a helpless shrug in response. The child's knowledge was inexplicable, yet she spoke with absolute conviction. As they approached the sound of rushing water, Michael signaled for quiet. "If there are poachers, they'll be armed. We stay together, and at the first sign of danger, we retreat and call for backup." The waterfall came into view, a 60-foot cascade tumbling over moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. To the right, partially hidden by dense foliage, was the dark opening of a cave. Emma tugged insistently at Savannah's hand. "He's in there, Mommy. He's waiting." Michael and Thomas drew their service weapons, approaching the cave entrance with professional caution. Dr. Chen stayed back with Savannah and Emma, her medical bag ready. "Forest Service. Anyone inside, identify yourself." Michael's voice echoed off the stone walls. Silence answered him, broken only by the steady rush of the waterfall. The rangers exchanged glances, then slowly entered the cave, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Minutes later, Michael emerged, his expression a mixture of disbelief and concern. Emma was right. There's evidence of recent human activity, cigarette butts, food wrappers, and... He hesitated, glancing at the child. "There's an empty cage large enough for a bear, broken open from the inside." Emma frowned. "He's not there anymore?" "No, sweetheart," Thomas said gently. "But it looks like he was, and it seems he escaped." "Then where—" Savannah's question was cut short by a low, rumbling growl from the trees behind them. Everyone froze. Slowly, carefully, they turned to face the source of the sound. There, partially obscured by shadow and foliage, stood an adolescent black bear. No longer a cub, but not yet fully grown, his dark eyes intelligent and cautious. A distinctive lighter patch of fur marked his right ear, the same detail Emma had colored in her drawing that morning. "Brownie," Emma whispered, her voice full of wonder and relief. The adults tensed, poised to grab Emma if the bear showed any sign of aggression. But the animal remained still, his attention fixed entirely on the small human child. What happened next would later be described differently by each witness. Michael would report that Emma simply stepped forward before anyone could stop her. Thomas would insist that the bear approached first, with unusual gentleness for a wild animal. Dr. Chen would document in her scientific journal that both moved simultaneously, as if choreographed. Savannah, however, would remember it as a moment of perfect clarity. Her daughter and the bear moving toward each other with the natural gravity of old friends reuniting, fear absent from both. "Emma, don't move," she whispered, her heart pounding. But it was too late. Emma had already closed half the distance between herself and the bear, her hand outstretched just as it had been 5 years before. The bear lowered his massive head, sniffing the air cautiously. Dr. Chen had her tranquilizer gun ready, but hesitated to use it. "This is unprecedented," she murmured. "He should be displaying threat behaviors with this many humans present, especially near his territory." The bear took another step forward, then another. When only 3 feet separated them, he sat back on his haunches, bringing his eye level closer to Emma's. The child showed no fear, only gentle concern. "You got away from the bad men," she said conversationally, as if chatting with a classmate. "That was smart, but you're hurt." Only then did the adults notice what Emma had somehow already perceived. A thin wire snare was wrapped around the bear's right front paw, cutting into the flesh. The animal had managed to break free from the cage, but not from the cruel metal wire. "Dr. Chen," Michael said softly, "can you help him?" The veterinarian looked conflicted. "I'd need to sedate him first, but given this unusual behavior, I'm afraid disrupting whatever's happening here could be dangerous." Emma turned to look at the adults with surprising authority. "He'll let you help him. He knows we're trying to help." "Emma, honey, you can't possibly know that," Savannah began. But Dr. Chen was watching the bear with new intensity. Actually, his body language is remarkably calm. No raised hackles, no teeth baring, pupils normal size. Her scientific curiosity seemed to overcome her caution. If we move very slowly, and if Emma keeps doing whatever she's doing, we might have a chance. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary wildlife intervention ever documented in Pine Ridge Preserve. Under Emma's continued soft reassurances, the adolescent bear remained still, while Dr. Chen carefully administered a mild sedative. Not enough for full unconsciousness, but sufficient to dull the pain. With Michael and Thomas ready to intervene if necessary, she delicately removed the wire snare, cleaned and treated the wound, and applied antibiotic ointment. Throughout the procedure, Emma sat cross-legged just far enough away to give the adults working space, but close enough that the bear kept her in his sight at all times. She spoke continuously in a gentle stream of childish observations and encouragement that seemed to keep the wild animal calm. "You're very brave, Brownie. The doctor is nice. She fixed my arm when I fell off the swing last summer. Your mom is worried about you. She's been looking everywhere. We should find her after you feel better." When the treatment was complete, Doctor. Chen backed away slowly, her face flushed with professional excitement. "I've never seen anything like this. Never. He should be attacking us or fleeing, not cooperating." The mild sedative began to wear off, the bear becoming more alert, but still showing no signs of aggression. He rose carefully to his feet, testing his bandaged paw with a tentative step. "He says, 'Thank you,'" Emma announced, standing up as well. Savannah might have dismissed this as childish imagination, except for what happened next. The bear extended his injured paw slightly, looking directly at Dr. Chen, then lowered his head in what appeared remarkably like a nod of acknowledgement. "Oh my God," the veterinarian whispered. A louder crash in the underbrush startled everyone, and then she appeared. The mother bear, larger and more imposing than her offspring, burst into the clearing with protective fury in her eyes. The rangers raised their weapons instinctively, but Emma stepped forward. "No! She's just scared for Brownie." The mother bear's charge slowed as she processed the scene before her, her offspring standing calmly among humans, unharmed despite the bandage visible on his paw. Her enormous head swung between the humans and her child, confusion evident in her posture. "It's okay," Emma called to her, using the same gentle tone she had used with the younger bear. "We fixed his OE. The bad men are gone." Savannah held her breath, certain they were witnessing their last moments. No mother, human or animal, would tolerate strangers near her wounded child. Yet the massive bear paused, her intelligence visibly working through the unprecedented situation. The younger bear moved toward his mother with a slight limp, making soft huffing noises that seemed to communicate something to her. She sniffed him thoroughly, paying special attention to the bandaged paw, then raised her head to stare directly at the humans. Recognition dawned in her dark eyes, unmistakable, impossible to deny. This was the same bear who had nearly lost her cub 5 years ago, who had witnessed a human child reach out to her offspring in a moment of innocent connection. Somehow, against all scientific understanding of Ursine cognition, she remembered. The mother bear made a deep chuffing sound, then turned and ambled slowly toward the forest, pausing to look back at her offspring. The younger bear followed, but not before turning to gaze one last time at Emma. "Bye, Brownie," the child said softly. "I'll see you again." As the bears disappeared into the dense woods, the adults stood in stunned silence. It was Michael who finally spoke. "We need to find those poachers. Now." The investigation that followed would uncover a sophisticated wildlife trafficking operation that had continued Jacob Reeves' work after his imprisonment. 3 men were eventually arrested. their connections traced to illegal exotic animal markets across international borders. The evidence collected from the cave, including DNA samples and equipment serial numbers, provided the final links needed to dismantle a network that had operated in the shadows for over a decade. But it was the bear's story that captured public imagination. Dr. Chen's careful documentation of the medical intervention, which Thomas had partially recorded on his phone, became the subject of scientific debate and wonder. Researchers from major universities requested permission to study the Marshall property and the surrounding forest, hoping to understand the unique relationship that defied conventional understanding of human-wildlife dynamics. Most of these requests were gently but firmly refused. Savannah became fiercely protective of both her daughter's privacy and the bear's right to live undisturbed. The Pine Ridge Preserve was expanded, with stricter protections and increased ranger patrols, ensuring no poachers would threaten its inhabitants again. Emma's connection with the bears remained a mystery that science couldn't fully explain. Child psychologists suggested extraordinary empathy combined with vivid imagination. Wildlife experts proposed that the bears had simply become habituated to human presence in a unique way. A few fringe researchers spoke of interspecies telepathy, though such theories were generally dismissed by mainstream science. For the Marshalls, the truth was both simpler and more profound. Some bonds transcend explanation, crossing boundaries that should be uncrossable. They didn't need to understand it to honor it. As Emma grew, her unusual affinity for animals never diminished. By age 12, she had become an accomplished wildlife artist, her drawings displaying an intuitive understanding of animal behavior and emotion that specialists found remarkable. Though she never again approached wild bears as she had that day by the waterfall, local rangers occasionally reported unusual sightings, a mother bear and her now adult son appearing at the forest edge near the Marshall property, watching the house with unusual interest before disappearing back into the wilderness. On Emma's 13th birthday, she received an unexpected visitor. Ranger Michael Hayes, now the head of the Pine Ridge Conservation District, arrived with a special package. "I've been saving this," he told her, handing over a manila envelope. "Thought you should have it when you were old enough to understand its significance." Inside was the original photograph he had taken 8 years earlier, the impossible moment when a baby girl and bear cub had reached for each other across the divide between their worlds. Alongside it was a second photograph, taken the day at the waterfall, showing an older Emma sitting calmly beside a sedated bear while Dr. Chen treated his injured paw. "There's a research position opening at the Wildlife Center next summer," Michael told her. "Just part-time for students your age, thought you might be interested." Emma traced the photographs with gentle fingers. What happened to him, to Jacob Reeves? Michael seemed surprised by the question. "He's still in prison, due for parole consideration next year, I believe." "I want to meet him," Emma said with quiet determination. "Meet him? Why on earth would you want that?" Emma's expression held wisdom far beyond her 13 years, because he needs to understand what he almost destroyed, and what he helped create. 6 months later, in a supervised visit at Pine Ridge Correctional Facility, an aging Jacob Reeves sat across from a teenage girl he had never officially met, yet whose life he had irrevocably altered. The man who had once seen only dollar signs when looking at wildlife now worked in the prison's rehabilitation program, teaching fellow inmates to train service dogs. "I've thought about you every day for 8 years, he told Emma, his voice rough with emotion. "About what I almost did, about what I saw that morning. Tell me what you remember," Emma requested softly. Jacob's weathered face creased with the effort of recollection. "I remember impossibility," a baby who wasn't afraid, a mother bear who showed mercy. I remember thinking the world wasn't what I thought it was. Emma placed the two photographs on the table between them. They're still out there, still free. Tears welled in the former poacher's eyes. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." When Emma turned 16, she made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. Against her mother's initial concerns, she applied for a wildlife research internship that would take her to remote regions around the world, studying human-wildlife conflict resolution. Her application essay, titled "What Bears Taught Me About Humanity," earned her not only the position but also a scholarship to study wildlife biology at the State University. The night before she was to leave, Emma stood on the porch of their cabin, gazing out at the darkened forest. The air was heavy with the scent of pine and distant rain, the stars obscured by gathering clouds. "I know you're out there," she said softly to the darkness. "I'm going away for a while, to learn how to help others like you." For several minutes, nothing moved in the shadowy tree line. Then, as if conjured by her words, two large forms emerged from the forest. A mother bear, now graying around her muzzle, and her fully grown son, his right ear still marked by that distinctive lighter patch. They stood at the edge of the clearing, maintaining a respectful distance but clearly visible in the porch light. Behind Emma, the cabin door opened. Savannah stepped out, no longer afraid, but still respectful of the wild power these creatures represented. "They came to say goodbye," she said, wonder in her voice despite the years of unusual bear encounters. "No," Emma replied with gentle certainty. "They came to say, until we meet again." Mother and daughter stood together as the bears watched in silence. No words were exchanged, no physical contact made, yet something profound passed between the humans and the wild creatures. An understanding that defied scientific explanation but felt as real as the wooden porch beneath their feet. After several minutes, the bears turned and melted back into the forest, disappearing as silently as they had arrived. But their message lingered in the night air, a reminder that sometimes the most important connections cross boundaries we once thought impenetrable. As Emma Marshall carried that message out into the wider world, the story of a baby who cried for a bear cub continued to spread, touching hearts and changing perspectives on what separates us from the wild. Not just a viral moment captured in a photograph, but a living lesson about compassion that transcended species, language, and time, putting everyone who heard it, even the most cynical, in tears. 20 years later, Dr. Emma Marshall stood at the edge of a different forest, thousands of miles from the cabin where she had spent her childhood. The Kodaikanal Wildlife Sanctuary in southern India stretched before her, lush and vibrant with life. As the director of the International Coalition for Wildlife Protection, she had come to inaugurate a new sanctuary for rescued sloth bears, animals saved from the cruel practice of dancing bears that had once been common in the region. Her work had taken her across 6 continents to places where humans and wildlife existed in both conflict and harmony. The method she had developed for resolving these conflicts had become standard practice in conservation efforts worldwide. Approaches rooted not in fear or dominance but in understanding and respect. Approaches that had begun with a baby's tears for a captive bear cub. "Dr. Marshall, they're ready for you," called her assistant, gesturing toward the gathering of local officials, former poachers turned conservationists, and the families who would serve as caretakers for the sanctuary. Emma nodded, but before joining them, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small, worn photograph, the image that had changed everything. The edges were frayed from years of handling, the colors slightly faded, but still clear enough to see a baby's hand reaching toward a bear cub in a moment of pure, unbounded compassion. She had carried this photograph to every new project, every challenging negotiation, every moment when the barriers between humans and wildlife seemed insurmountable. It reminded her that boundaries existed primarily in the human mind, and what the mind creates, the heart can transcend. As she tucked the photograph away and walked toward the waiting crowd, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her mother, Savannah, now in her 60s, but still living in the expanded and renovated cabin at the edge of what was now known as the Marshall Hayes Wildlife Preserve. The message contained no words, only a single image, a trail camera photo taken the previous night. In it, an elderly female black bear stood at the forest edge near the cabin, her muzzle now white with age, her body showing the inevitable signs of her many years. Beside her was a younger bear, clearly her grandcub or perhaps even great-grandcub, with a distinctive light patch on its right ear, a genetic trait passed down through generations. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she stared at the image. The mother bear would be near the end of her natural lifespan now, yet still she came to the edge of the forest. Still she remembered. Still she passed her unusual lack of fear for this one human dwelling to her descendants. Some connections, it seemed, outlived even those who formed them. The dedication ceremony passed in something of a blur for Emma, though she delivered her prepared speech with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public speaking. She spoke of breaking cycles of exploitation, of finding new ways for humans and wildlife to coexist, of the capacity for change that existed in every heart, even those who had once caused harm. As an example, she told them about Jacob Reeves. After serving his prison sentence, the former poacher had established a rehabilitation program that paired former wildlife traffickers with conservation efforts, helping them redirect their intimate knowledge of animal behavior toward protection instead of exploitation. He had passed away 3 years earlier, but not before seeing his program adopted in 12 countries. Every year on the anniversary of his passing, Emma told the gathered crowd, bears appear at the edge of our family property, as if paying their respects to the man who nearly destroyed them, but ultimately helped save countless others. As twilight settled over the sanctuary, Emma found herself alone at the observation platform, watching the rescued bears explore their new enclosure. Tomorrow, they would be released into the larger protected area, the first step in their journey back to the wild after lifetimes of captivity and abuse. One bear in particular caught her attention, an older female whose scarred muzzle and hesitant movements spoke of years of mistreatment. Unlike the others, she approached the edge of the enclosure closest to the platform, rising on her hind legs to gaze directly at Emma with intelligent, assessing eyes. Without thinking, Emma raised her hand, palm outward, the same gesture she had made as an infant, reaching toward a frightened cub across an impossible divide. The bear remained on her hind legs, studying Emma with an intensity that seemed to transcend ordinary animal awareness. Then, slowly, deliberately, she lifted her paw, extending it toward the human standing beyond the barrier. A young Indian conservationist who had stayed behind gasped softly. "I have never seen such a thing," he whispered. "These bears fear humans more than anything. They have been beaten, starved, tormented for generations." "She doesn't see a human," Emma replied, her voice thick with emotion. "She sees a kindred spirit, someone who knows what it means to be caught between worlds." As if confirming her words, the bear lowered her paw and dropped back to all fours, giving one final glance at Emma before ambling away to join the others. That night, in her modest room at the sanctuary's research station, Emma wrote in her journal as she had every night since she was old enough to hold a pencil. The entry began as it always did, with the date, the location, and a detailed account of the day's events. But it ended with something more personal, more profound. I've spent my life trying to understand what happened that day when I was too young to remember. The day that determined the course of my life before I could even walk. Scientists have offered theories. Unusual imprinting, chance behavioral anomalies, even the desperate attempt to humanize animal behavior. Mom simply calls it a miracle. Maybe they're all partly right. But tonight, looking into that bear's eyes, I understood something I've always felt but never fully articulated. There is no firm boundary between us and them, between human and wild. There is only connection or separation, compassion or indifference. And the choice between them shapes not just individual lives, but the very world we share. What made everyone cry all those years ago wasn't just that a baby reached for a bear cub. It was the recognition that in our truest, most innocent state, we already know what adults struggle to remember, that every living thing deserves our tears, our protection, our love, that the divisions we create are illusions that vanish in the presence of pure compassion. Tonight, half a world away from where it all began, a bear who had every reason to hate humans chose connection instead of fear. And in that moment, I was 9 months old again, reaching across a divide that exists only in our minds. The bears at home will be watching the cabin tonight, as they always do when I'm away. Mom will leave the porch light on for them, and perhaps set out some berries at the forest's edge, our compromise between wild and tame. When I return, they'll be waiting, as they have always waited, carrying forward a promise made before I had words to speak it. Some stories have no ending, only continuation. Some connections, once forged, can never truly be broken. They simply evolve, adapt, and wait for us to remember what we knew in our first moments of life. The compassion is the natural state of all living things, waiting to be awakened with a simple outstretched hand. Emma closed her journal and switched off the lamp. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new connections, new opportunities to bridge the worlds she had spent her life moving between. But tonight, in dreams, she was a child again, standing at the edge of a forest with no fear, only wonder, as shadows moved among shadows and wild eyes reflected an ancient understanding back to her own. And halfway around the world, as if sensing her thoughts, a bear with a light-colored patch on his right ear paused in his evening forage, lifted his head toward the distant sky, and remembered a human child who had once cried for him. In that moment of simultaneous remembrance, human and animal, separated by continents but connected by something deeper than physical proximity, the story that had moved millions to tears continued its silent, powerful work, reminding us all that in a world of boundaries and divisions, the greatest courage is found in reaching across the divide, even when we cannot know what waits on the other side.